Hi, I'm Samuel C. Spitali, author of How to Win the War on Truth. In this video, I'll explain the truth about voter fraud. Contrary to popular belief, voter fraud is incredibly rare. One study found only 10 cases in 15 years. That's 1 out of every 15 million prospective voters. Other studies have found voting fraud to be even rarer, between 0.0003% and 0.0025%. Voters have a greater chance of spying a UFO or being struck and killed by lightning. Out of the 136 million votes cast in the 2016 election, there were only 4 cases of fraud, or 0.000003%. Out of 154.6 million votes cast in the 2020 election, there were only 6 cases of fraud, or 0.000004%. 4 of those individuals tried to vote twice, while the other 2 tried to vote for their deceased mothers. All 6 were registered Republicans. So-called voter impersonation happens only in 1 out of every 32 million votes. In the rare instance when it does occur, it's usually due to clerical errors, like misspellings, outdated city registers, or basic human incompetence. The odds that voter fraud would influence an election are a meager 0.0000017%. So if voter fraud is so rare, why do we think it's so common? Because accusations of voter fraud have historically been a voter suppression tactic to keep people of color from voting. It dates back to the aftermath of the Civil War on the grounds that newly freed slaves could not be trusted to vote because they would shift the balance of power away from white people. After the 15th Amendment was passed in 1869, lawmakers could no longer ban minorities outright from voting. Instead, they had to find more creative means of voter suppression, like a poll tax, a fee that could be as high as 2% of one's income. Another voter suppression tactic was requiring black people to pass so-called literacy tests, even though it had been illegal to teach slaves to read. These tests required correctly guessing such riddles as how many seeds were in a watermelon or how many jelly beans were in a jar. If you were black, there was no correct answer. As a result, before World War II, only 20% of eligible citizens voted, and only 3% of Southern blacks were even registered. Poll taxes and literacy tests remained legal until the Voting Rights Act of 1964. Within 5 years, the number of black people registered to vote rose drastically, doubling or tripling in some places, and in the case of Mississippi, multiplying by 10. Yet once again, lawmakers sought to undermine voting rights to keep people of color from voting, such as purging voter rolls. In the 2000 presidential election, which was decided by 537 votes in Florida, the state purged 181,171 votes. The Civil Rights Commission found that black people were 900% more likely to have their votes tossed than white people. Thousands of ballots have been discarded for simply being in the wrong envelope, having a stray mark, being folded incorrectly, or having a questionable signature. After black people turned out in droves to help elect Barack Obama in 2008, claims of voter fraud and election fraud made a comeback. Conservative legislators responded by eliminating some 15,000 voting locations, mostly in minority communities, under the guise of protecting the ballot. One study showed that for every additional mile to a polling place, black voting declines by 5%. They also restricted early voting, reduced the hours of voter precincts, and even installed faulty machines that slowed down voting. After the historic voter turnout in the 2020 election, white politicians once again cried voter fraud. Within months, 47 state legislatures introduced 361 new bills to limit voting access, including a Georgia bill that would criminalize offering food or drink to voters standing in line for hours on end, a move straight out of the Jim Crow South when civil rights workers were arrested for serving food without a license. As Paul Weyrich, co-founder of the Conservative Heritage Foundation, declared in 1980, "I don't want everybody to vote. Our leverage in the elections quite candidly goes up as the voting populace goes down." To keep voter turnout down, lobbying groups like the American Legislative Exchange Council, co-founded by Weyrich, draft voter ID policies for legislators to implement at the state level to make it harder for people to vote. While requiring a photo ID may not seem like a big impediment, the Brennan Center for Justice found that such a voting requirement would impact 6 million senior citizens, 8.1 million Hispanic people, 5.5 million black people, and 4.5 million 18 to 24-year-olds, as 1 in 9 Americans lack an ID. As Republican political strategist Karl Rove once explained it, If you can get rid of 0.25% of the minority vote, you can turn an election to his party's favor. So voter restrictions, whether in the form of poll taxes, literacy tests, or voter ID laws, help keep those numbers down, all under the pretense of voter fraud. To read more, check out my book, How to Win the War on Truth. Thanks to Alan Wincup for the awesome illustrations, and thank you for watching.